Talk Show. Recorded live.
Hello, everybody. This is the Genesis Science Fiction Radio Show, a service of the BlackScienceFictionSociety.com website. My name is William. I'll be your host. And for May 3rd, at least a crappy, cold, rainy May 3rd here in Chicago, this is the episode where we have John Garrett as our special guest. John Garrett is a triple, quadruple, quintuple threat as well. He's quite the artist. Actually, if you want to check out a little bit of his work and a little bit of what he does during the show, you can go to hypertransitory.com. Take a look at what he has, and if you have questions, obviously, in the second half of the show, you are welcome to dial in or type in your questions for him, and he'll answer them. John, how are you doing tonight, man?
All right. Hey, thanks a lot for having me.
Oh, it's great. How's the weather up north there?
Just the same as down in the Chi, wet and dreary.
Uh-huh. All right, so, obviously people want to know what the connections are and things like that. Let's start out with that, and then we'll get a little bit about you. What is your connection to BSFS, and how did you either get discovered or how did you discover the site? Excuse me. Tell us a little bit about your relationship to the place where we all hang out.
Sure. Originally, I was actually checking out the Writer's Digest forums. I don't know if those exist anymore, but the writer over there, who actually was Latino, he gave me the link and said, "Why aren't you over here?" Mm-hmm. And I said, "Oh, wow, I didn't even know about this. It's really good that he took the time to tell me that." And sure enough, I logged in and started reading some really incredible stories from people. And after that was a wrap. I was in.
Well, that's pretty cool. I mean, all right. So let's specify what's your particular genre? What's your art? What's your kind of thing that you hang your hat on that this person would have directed you to this site?
Well, at the time, I was writing a fantasy story, and I was just trying to get tips on how to go ahead and submit that thing and pitch it. But I think most people come to know me for comics instead of writing. Mm-hmm. And that's pretty much my main thing, comics, and then I kind of branch out from there.
What kind of comics do you do? I mean, what's the genre or the basic premise of your comics, your stories?
Yeah, and even that, it's kind of a detriment because I'm not the guy that does just one thing. I have some humor comics, I have some sci-fi, I have some fantasy comics, superhero comics, and whatever you think of the strategy for that, that's kind of the way I am. I try to cover the spread.
All right. Well, we'll get back to that in a little while. Where did you grow up, John?
I grew up in the Milwaukee area, so I'm pretty close to home. And I'm just living outside of Milwaukee now, and I really really haven't lived too many other places except for Wisconsin. So sweet home. Yeah.
As a Chicagoan, I will not get into any cross-state rivalry that Wisconsin obviously has.
Oh yeah, we don't need to hear about you guys envy.
not to mention that whole football thing. I'll tell you, living in Green Bay and being a Chicago Bears fan was probably the most hazardous duty I ever did.
Oh yeah. Yeah, that could be. It can get violent. So.
Mm-hmm. About how old were you when you started kind of feeling your creative juices and maybe, some of those things were manifesting themselves?
I had to be, 5 or 6. That was the fateful day my mother actually bought me 4 comics. And mm-hmm. they kind of taught me how to read, and I kept trying to copy those superheroes.
Right.
And I just kept on doing it because obviously I couldn't get it right, and every opportunity I had to draw those characters, and I just kept on doing it for the rest of my life. So.
That's pretty cool. And what about the story aspect, creating a narrative to go along with your drawings?
That actually developed a lot later. I would kind of draw a character, and that was it. There was no story. Just
right.
Bam, there they are. But eventually, it got to a point where these guys should really be doing something, shouldn't they? And I figured I should really write a story and really make a narrative with these characters. And that's when I really started to learn that there's actually a craft to this sequential art. You can't just plop them down and expect it to work out.
Was that kind of like in a college thing, a high school thing? About how old were you, when you started figuring this, the gestalt of the entire thing out?
I'd say I was in high school, and it really took me physically going down to Chicago Comic-Con, and an editor was just pretty much ripping me to shreds, like, no, this is bad. Why is this happening? I can't tell what's happening. It's like, wow, I've really got to put some work into this.
Well, at least he didn't discourage you to the point where you gave it up.
Right. I mean, he was just saying that no one's going to hire you if they can't. You're supposed to be telling a story with these pictures, and then it hit me. Yeah, that's pretty much it. I need to tell a story with these pictures.
Mhm. And so this is about when you're in high school, and of course I want to point out to everybody that he did have to come down to Chicago to explore and improve his art. All right, I'll quit that. I'm sorry. But about how old were you? When did you kind of whip things into shape enough that you were able to kind of exploit the commercial aspects of this art form?
Well, honestly, it took me a very long time to really take it to that level.
Mm-hmm.
It was actually a situation where I thought that if you didn't work for Marvel or DC, you weren't working. And
okay.
It then took me several years out of college when I realized there's really no reason I can't do my own thing. I was hung up on drawing Spider-Man, drawing Superman, drawing for somebody else.
Sure.
And then you realize, wait a minute, I don't have to be validated by them. I can make up my own stories and do this.
Well, that's not too bad. About what year was that when you started kind of thinking about turning commercial on this?
I'd probably say around the turn of the century, right around that time when I thought I could probably do this.
Mm-hmm.
But at that point, I think that a lot of the internet infrastructure of doing these things was not quite in place.
That's true, yeah. And so, did you maybe exhibit your art or exploit your art locally before you branched out and before the internet caught up with you? Did you do any art shows or anything like that, or did you hang out with comic producing people? I mean, what it seems like there's kind of a lag time in there where you could have been developing your art, you could have been honing your skills. What
Yes.
kinds of things did you do during that period of time?
Actually, what ended up happening at that point was I kind of gave up a little bit, and I was working, actually doing pre-press, printing pre-press, and working on that. And it was kind of a point where it's like I'm an artist, but I don't know if you know much about pre-press, where it's not an artistic position. You are getting someone else's artwork, and you're making it printable.
Okay.
So I'm like, okay, I can't really get in at Marvel. Now I'm looking at someone else's art and making sure they get in print. So it was kind of a time where it's like, okay, am I wasting my time with this? But really, again, it's like it took a lot of other people doing things on the internet that made me realize I can use this to really display what I can do. And I don't really have to wait for someone to come along and say, okay, we accept you, and you're okay, and now you can publish.
That's pretty interesting, and it's in some ways it's a little bit typical because the internet and, the social aspects of it, the networking aspects of it also, it takes away certain boundaries and gives you a better idea of what's going on outside your neighborhood, outside your immediate purview. When you saw these kinds of things developing while you're doing somebody else's work and discovering that you could do it on your own, were there some online influences that helped you get to where you've gotten?
There were a ton of them, and I don't know if you remember, back in the early 2000s, 2003, 2004, there was probably a zillion little web comics that came and went.
Mm-hmm.
And I would be on those sites. I don't think I could name even one of them now, but I would be on those sites and I would say, this person is putting their artwork up here and it's really cool. I need to be doing this. And then I even had to take a step back and learn how to develop websites.
Mm-hmm.
So, I think a lot of creative people, you get stuck doing the technical grunt work. You really just want to be doing your art, but at some
right.
point you've got to, make it happen technically. So, I think it's just seeing other people who, they're not trying to go to Marvel, they're not trying to go to DC, they just want people to see their work and possibly get a sale out of it. Not everybody's
mm-hmm.
looking for a sale.
Sure. And so once you got to that point, when did you start your own website? When did you start implementing, what you figured to be the kind of business model that was going to pay off for you?
Well, I started my site probably 2 or 3 times over.
Okay.
Maybe in 2005, I started it, and it was just totally wrong.
mm-hmm.
I just couldn't understand why no one would see it. And, what was I supposed to do? I would put stuff up there and then nothing. So then I restarted it. I got a couple books,
mm-hmm.
restarted it again, nothing. And I'd say probably 2009, 2008, I finally decided on the blog format. And I started meeting people in the blogging blogosphere
mm-hmm.
and seeing how they were doing things. And I thought, this is how I need to approach this.
That's pretty common. Yeah.
Yes.
Go ahead.
Yeah, that's exactly it. It's pretty common. People are doing it, and they're sharing, and like you said, the social media, they're integrated right into it. So
sure.
It just made so much sense.
Well, one of the things that people stumble over the fact is they think that once they do produce a website, for good or for bad, that people are just going to stumble upon it or, accidentally fall upon it, find it, that maybe a search engine might give them a leg up in kind of directing people to the site, but they don't realize that not only is there a business to it, but there's an art to it as well. How long do you think it took you before you had kind of mastered enough of the art that you had traffic that made you feel like this was a worthwhile endeavor?
Oh, it was literally, I can almost say it was exactly a year and a half.
Mm-hmm.
I toiled for a year just trying to figure out a way to get people to look at it until I finally did realize that when you are starting out, you don't have anything to offer anyone but your attention and your friendship.
Right. Okay.
And that's what I did is I just went and I'm not going to try to get things from people. I'm just
mm-hmm.
going to interact with them. And the people that I like, I'm going to interact with them. And sure enough, it started to pay. I was like, hey, who knew that being friendly and making friends with people was what you needed?
And so right now, let's take a look, at hypertransitory.com. What iteration of your site is this now? How old is this particular iteration of your web presence?
I'd say it's about 5 years old.
And just some quick statistics. How many visitors do you think you have in an average day?
Per day. I'm kind of looking at the per month usually.
Okay, per month is fine.
Well, what happened is I have to admit that I did slack off a bit last year. I was looking at about 18,000 per month, which is not large.
Mm-hmm.
It's not large, but I had worked my way up to that, and just posting regularly and getting out there. And there came a point where I got lazy, you know. So at some point you have enough business, you have enough stuff, and you just relax. And then that's what I did, and I stopped posting and kind of stopped interacting. And I'd say it really went down to a little bit over half of that. So maybe 10,000 per month now.
Mm-hmm.
But it's not great. It's not horrible.
Well, that's not bad. I mean, don't make it sound. I mean, okay, yeah. So there's 7 billion people in the world. I don't know, maybe however many billion get on the internet, but still, to have garnered that much traffic, and I'm sure a lot of that is repeat traffic, isn't it?
Yeah, and again, it's like I had people out there who were actually emailing me like, when's that next comic coming out? Where's that comic at? And that's, when you get that audience, I just want people to know, it's like, don't waste it. Keep it coming, especially when they want it and they're literally asking you for it. You got to keep it coming.
Mm-hmm.
And that's, that's just it's a minor hiccup that will be rectified.
Well, I mean, you make it sound like a deficiency. It's not a deficiency. I mean, doing a comic, creating a world, creating something that's supposed to have, some continuity is, whether people want to face up to it or not, is really a full-time job. And if you have a full-time job doing that, and maybe you have another job that helps sustain you financially, you have a family, you have friends, there are a lot of components to a person's life. So sometimes, there's going to be an ebb and flow. I certainly wouldn't feel bad. I mean, 10,000, 20,000 unique visitors, excuse me, every month is still a fairly substantial community to be hanging out with and showing off your work.
Yeah, it definitely, it's really gratifying a lot of the times when you get people who they drop by and leave a comment, or they just say something on Facebook or Twitter, mm-hmm. and people who are looking for the next thing. That's gold when they just ask you, when is that next thing coming out?
Absolutely.
It feels really good.
Now, let's talk a little bit about your current work. What are some of the things? Oh no, you know what? Let's back the truck up. Let's talk about your relationship with BSFS, because before the show, just so that everybody knows, it's not really inside baseball or anything, but before the show you mentioned that you've had a relationship with our administrator Jarvis for quite some time, and this is about the first time you guys have ever spoken. What kinds of collaborative things have you guys worked on together?
Well, a couple years back, I did see a post on the BSFS where he was asking for people to collaborate on a sci-fi magazine. Mm-hmm. And I thought, this is something I can do, because I have experience in layout and pre-press and publishing and such. So mm-hmm. I thought this is a perfect area for me to contribute. And honestly, I really love seeing the stories that people contribute in their artwork and getting that first-hand look at it when the files are sent to me. And it's really kind of a feather in my cap to put that together.
Mm-hmm.
And we've been doing that. I'm actually working on the current issue now.
Mm-hmm.
And so we've been doing it for quite a while, but yes, this is the first time I actually heard his voice. And the same thing for him. We never really spoke.
I have to admit that is probably one of the more powerful aspects of today's internet, is that people do collaborate. People do a lot of things together. People get to know people online, get to know people to the extent where if you said, so what's this guy Jarvis like? What's this guy John like? And I can tell them, well, they do this, they do that. They're this kind of person. They're brilliant. They're moody. Whatever. and never having met the person face to face in life. It's really a different kind of interaction, dialogue, if you want to use the old kind of word, different intercourse with people, because what you're doing is you've developed a relationship that did not call for, face-to-face kind of interaction. And
Right.
I think it's pretty cool that you've been doing that. I like your work in the first one. I've got a copy of the magazine. I can't wait for the second one. Let's ask this. How soon do you think before it may actually be going to press?
I just got it, so I'll tell you what normally happens. It might take about 3 weeks or so. I'm hoping to get it done before that, but I never really know until I get down to that last bit of space. I might have to email them and say, hey, I just cannot fit this. We got to think of something else, and sometimes it may, then Jarvis has got to go back and contact certain people and say, hey, sorry, you might not be able to be in this month, or try to get someone else if we need to fill some space. So I can never say for sure.
Right.
But it is the kind of challenge that I do enjoy. So.
And in your estimation, how was episode 1 or volume 1, issue 1? How was that received? What kind of critiques did you get on it? And what, if anything, did you change up based on that for the second edition?
Well, when I looked on the site, I think, as you can imagine, most of the response was positive. On the site, I didn't really see any response that was really not on the site.
Mm-hmm.
But one thing I did try to do, I always try to make the text as big as possible. But sometimes we don't have the room, and that's one thing I always worry about.
Right.
Is it's just too tiny, and I don't want people to have to blow it up a zillion times before they can read anything. But that's the thing I struggle with every issue.
Well, I appreciate that, being 81 years old and blind in one eye and can't see in the other. Having to, and you're absolutely right. When let's say people look at something online, you've seen horribly configured websites where somebody either has the text too big or too small, or they have a gray background and yellow text, or something horrendous. Desktop publishing is still an art. I mean, yes, there's some skill to it, but in order to make it, physically appealing, visually exciting, and easy to read is not an inconsiderable skill. So, the two of you are to be commended for laying out the first magazine the way that you did. What's your favorite part of doing that kind of work?
Well, I'm kind of a tech guy, and I always like to use the best features of whatever program I'm using. And to lay out the magazine, I use Adobe InDesign.
Mm-hmm.
And I'll literally go through. I love it when I kind of run into a wall, and I'll say, is there a feature in here that I can use to make this easier? Is there anything I can use that will automate this for me or something? And that's the kind of thing I do enjoy. So it's always fun for me to overcome an obstacle.
The technical aspects of actually setting it up, laying it out.
Yeah.
And what about the artistic side? Do you read the stories as you're going through? Do you make judgments about the best places to put them, things like that? That's also very important too. You want to lead off with something that brings people deeper and deeper into the magazine. How comfortable are you with those kind of editorial decisions and planning?
Well, I first of all, I do read everything, and I look forward to reading everything and check out the artwork. Normally, there might be, sometimes I get more direction than other times. Sometimes there might be an order already laid out for me. Mm-hmm. This story comes first, and then an advertisement, and then this. And usually when it comes to the ads, he's kind of left it up to me to fit those in, to take care of people and make sure that everyone gets their ad in without ruining the experience for people, and putting ads all in the middle of the story or something. But yeah.
They call it a necessary evil. Yes, you're conveying art, but it is also commerce. So, you've got to balance the two. All right, so let's talk about your site. Let's talk about hypertransitory.com. People who are listening can go ahead and check out your stuff. Give me a little overview, since not everybody's going to be able to look at it. Tell us a little bit about how you put it together and what's your main focus. Obviously, presenting your ideas and your world is the focus, but what are some of the strategies that you use in putting this together?
Well, initially when I was putting it together, just to do a little tech speak, and I was using the Joomla content management system, and I got to the point where I was very bored using it because at the time I knew everything there was to know about it. So I switched over to WordPress, which was a very lucky stroke for me because that just happened to be the platform that bloggers prefer. And I did not know that at the time, but it turned out to be a very lucky pick. And so I was able to integrate various social media technologies into that a lot easier. And it made things pretty simple for people to connect with me and get to know who I am. So it really just happened where I ended up talking about technical things, web stuff, and then my comics. It's kind of a hodgepodge. I don't laser in on any one subject. Like some blogs are just completely about this and that's it. And mine isn't like that. You might get me talking about comics, but the next week I'm offering up a tutorial on how to, do something in Joomla or Facebook or something. So, it'd probably be better if I did laser in on one, but I decided not to. It's my site, so I'll just do what I want.
Well, when you look at the home page, there's a lot of different things in here. A lot of things that people can click on that would be of interest, and it's more like, at least in my estimation, it's more like a mini news site. You've got you got titles like Giant Size Cyborg Zombie Steve Jobs and the dark alley of an eBay scam. There's a lot of different things on here. So I think that obviously the kind of content you have is sufficiently interesting to keep 10,000 or more people coming back for more. Did you have any help conceptualizing the site to make it more attractive for people to visit or anything like that, or is this a self-taught effort?
Well, what I did at first was I did use a template or a theme in WordPress.
Sure.
And I ended up modifying it extensively. So now it really doesn't look like anything. But before, my own testing and just seeing what people clicked on is what I eventually settled on. Like you see, there's the 5 things at the top of the comics. And I noticed when I looked at my stats, people were going to my home page, clicking on comics, and going to something in the comics section. So I said, let's make it easy, and those 5 blocks up there are really tracked, and those are the most popular things based on clicks, which really surprised me because they're not what I thought they would be. But I don't have anything to do with that. It literally just tracks the clicks, and that's what people want to see.
Right. So okay. So what are your favorite parts? The parts that you like more than anybody else, regardless of the traffic? Where do you really put your creativity? Where do you really kind of tie on all of your talent to make it as make it what you want it to be? Well,
for me, my number one thing is the comics. I do realize that even though the comics are clicked on the most, still my number one of all time article is a Facebook article that really is horribly out of date now. But I can't shake it. People keep searching and it keeps coming up in Google, and they must get there and realize that, oh, this is out of date. But for me, I tend to want to focus on more comics now, and I've put up some tutorials recently just because there are things that I overcome, so then I put it up on the web just in case anybody else needs to overcome these things. but in the near future, it's going to be a lot more back to comics because that's really what I want to focus on in the main part.
Sure. Well, I mean, you're obviously not everybody is going to have the same kind of interest that you do. But again, you know, I'm looking at people in the chat room. They're going, you know, they're going 10,000 people, 10,000 visitors a month is a pretty cool thing, and it really is. Hang on for a second. You're listening to Genesis Science Fiction Radio, service of the BlackScienceFictionSociety.com website. This is the May 3rd edition, 2013, and we're talking to John Garrett, comic creator, I would say probably editorial and layout person for Genesis Magazine, and quite an interesting person in his own right. For those who'd like to know a little bit more about him, you can visit hypertransitory.com. This is his blog page, and take a look at some of the things that he's interested in, and hopefully discover things that you'll be interested in. So other than this, do you do comics just online, or do you also publish, you know, hard copy?
I don't publish physically yet, and that's one of the things where I'm working on something now that is strictly for print, and that most of the things I do, obviously, they're meant to go up on the web, and you know, I don't really make them very high DPI or whatever. You know, so this one I'm really approaching it from a sense where it's going to be printed. I'm going to see if anyone would like to buy this. So that's it. I mean, actually, commerce above everything else. I mean, well, and what if you hang on to this for a while? Let's think about branching out. You know, would you think about the possibility of animating the work that you already do? You know, the comic work that you do, would you move on to that? I mean, if somebody just dropped a bunch of money in your lap for this website, what do you think you would go on and do? Really, what I would do is likely use that time to invest in creating characters. I do a lot of 3D stuff. I'm moving into 3D now.
Okay.
And I really like to just take the time and really just hit that hard. Sometimes it's not possible to just devote as much time to it as I would like. And me and Jarvis have spoken about that before. There's so much to learn, and it's a hard thing to truly master. But if I had the time, I would really just attack that and get it down. At that point, you can make print stuff. You can take those 3D figures, animate them, and make trailers, make whatever. Truly, the sky's the limit when you're doing that sort of thing.
You know, when you think about it, don't you, you know, I would consider most good artists to always be a work in progress. You know, there are those who want to stick with one thing for most of the, you know, forever. But with all of the really cool tools out there, with the support applications that are out there, moving into something different, or maybe kicking things up a notch, going from 2D to 3D, is definitely not beyond the pale. And it sounds to me like you've got interest in that area already.
Yeah, actually, several of my comics that are up there already are done totally in 3D. And actually, my most popular ones are actually done in 3D, which I was kind of surprised by, but that's just the way it worked out.
And so, if somebody comes along and buys you out, and they buy your world, your speculative universe, what have you, what would you do to bootstrap or kickstart a entirely new universe, one that would be, you know, different from what you've got now? I mean, you have the confidence that you have the creative juices to pull that off?
Yeah, I don't worry about that sort of thing because I always have another idea.
Okay.
I mean, I see some people who, somebody copied my idea. It's like, well, you know, at some point all ideas are a little bit derivative. You
Sure.
can always liken it to something else. I'll just make up something else. But I think what I would do, I would probably take one of my new ideas, and I really would laser in on that. Start up a website that's only about that. And I would just keep hitting that with free content, getting people interested in it. Hey, check this out. And maybe do that for a year or so before I dropped anything for sale.
Right, and build it back up.
Build it back up and just get people. That way you can see, hey, no one's interested in this. I'm going down the wrong path.
Sure.
And,
so, I mean, tell us a little bit about the kinds of stories, the kinds of plots that you put together for your comics, and a little bit about the characters too.
Sure. My most popular one is a fantasy setting. It was called the Life Taker, and that's a 3D one. And I did it using a program called Dad Studio. And it's really just this guy who is kind of he's a jerk, he's a bad person. He travels the countryside just taking what he wants, killing people, and that's it. There's no redeeming quality to him. And I was kind of surprised.
Is this well, let me ask, is this autobiographical at all?
No.
Oh,
no.
okay. I just wanted to make sure.
No, I don't think so.
Okay.
Yeah, well, people did ask me, where did you come up with this? Because a lot of my comics were kind of more funny, more humorous.
And this one's a little more dark.
It's kind of dark, and I was a little bit afraid that people would reject it.
Right.
And they didn't. And I did have people on my Facebook page, on Twitter, when is that new Life Taker coming out? And especially, I did one, and then I did a trilogy called The Return of the Life Taker. And some pretty brutal stuff happened in the third one. Well, I got all these great comments on it, but strangely enough, I got a lot of negative emails from people who they weren't willing to leave a negative comment for some reason, but they felt it necessary to go to my contact form and tell me I was violent and why did I do this? And there must be something wrong with me. And it's like, really? Okay, but really no negative comments.
Yeah, but people get excuse me, they get invested in an artist, they get invested in stories, characters and things like that. And when an artist breaks out of that and does something different, people feel betrayed. I think that the classic story was that Stephen King story that got turned into a movie, excuse me, Misery, where James Caan was the writer, and she did a whacking on his ankles because he killed off whatever the main character was.
Yes.
And even though that's a horror story, you've seen people turn on artists for that a lot, and I mean that's probably something that you're going to have to deal with when you branch out. I mean, what else can you do? You don't want to have to stick with the same thing, the same track all along. Let's take a good commercial example. Let's take the Harry Potter series. She wrote how many books and then decided, okay, the story is over and I have to move on. You had millions of people who were upset and disappointed because their favorite characters were they felt like they were leaving them. So, I mean, I think that, you got a little taste of that, and for better or for worse, it at least lets you know what's out there and what you're going to face when you start doing different things.
Yeah, definitely. I just wish that they kind of would have come into the comments and said those things, and it could have furthered the discussion a bit more.
Well, maybe they were trying to save you from the confrontation. I mean, people are also, I find that more people, especially people who are into creative things like that, are a little more sensitive. And, I don't think that anybody who would be a fan of yours would probably deliberately go out and want to trash you. Usually it's the people who are more angry about some other issue who do that. So maybe they were doing you a solid by not going and saying, this is the worst thing I've ever seen. Why would you go and switch it up and look what happened. Oh, like with what's that, Twilight, where the two stars were like living together or something like that, and then they broke up or she cheated on him, and then
right,
the whole world turned. What was her name? Kristen something?
Is it Kristen Stewart? I might
Kristen
be wrong.
Stewart, yeah. And so you got people calling her a trampire and things like that. I mean, that's the vagaries of a very fickle public, and I guess the best you could do is to try to keep putting your best work out there and hope it overcomes that kind of difficulty. So, now in response, I mean, how did you handle that? Did you get into a dialogue with those people even though it was kind of private, or did you just kind of let it go and say, well, this is my world. I'm going to do what I want to do in it, and to hell with everybody else? I mean, how did you handle that?
Yeah, actually, what I tried to do, I did ask every one of them, is it okay for me to publish your email as a comment? Otherwise, I'll just respond here. And I did respond, and not one of them responded to me. And I tried to say, well, this is just where this character goes, and I have different types of characters, and this one is not very heroic.
Right.
But it would be, it's kind of wrong if suddenly he turns into a hero. And I just tried to explain that, but no one responded, so it's kind of weird for me. Like, do I come out with another one, or what's going to happen? Are these people laying in wait, waiting to pounce if I come out with another one?
Well, do you think this is does this affect how you think about creating in the future? I mean, let's talk about that. I mean, what kind of long-term effect on you do you think that response is going to have, or do you think, well, this is just part of life, and I'm just going to move on and hope I can drag everybody else with me?
Well, yeah, there are some people who are like, screw everybody, and I'm just going to do it my way. And sometimes I am like that, but most of the time, I wish I was like that. But it's like, oh, they were really upset by this.
Yeah.
Which I do intend on to continue doing it my way.
Sure.
But if those people would care to, I might write. One thing about my comics, you might see there's a section where I talk about the comic, how I made it. After I post it, and right underneath I'll talk about how I made it and what kind of challenges I had. But maybe in those bottom parts I'll talk about, the driving of the story, or how I came to decide this.
Yeah, kind of like the entomology of the story, the characters, and the universe that you're creating. And, there's probably a good chance that you'll be drawing out some of those people as well who might say, well, I didn't like it at first, but it is creative, it's different. The other thing is you don't know what kind of long-term response you're going to get from your fans, but, I mean, obviously nobody wants to alienate their fans, again, it is doing this for the most part, yes, it may be a labor of love, but you do want to be able to get a little bit of, financial reward for your creativity and, if nothing else, to pay the bills so that you can keep on creating.
Yeah, no doubt.
So you've got this possible new thing that you might pull out of your hat. Do you have the structure of the kind of creative universe that you're making in mind already, or is this still a work in progress? How is this working out for you, John?
Well, I have these days I really make things rock solid. I'll really make out an outline. I'll make character bios and profiles, because I've learned the hard way that I'll get in the middle of a project and I'll forget. Wasn't I going to make up a character that was going to go in here? Oh, how was I going to resolve this?
Right.
And I won't have anything written down. And I don't know how many plot details I may have forgotten over the years of things that I should have had written down and locked up in solid form. So I went through with all my stories and wrote down every little detail and did the bios and did the sketches of what they're supposed to look like. And so I have it all. I have it all down.
Well, that's finding out a good, first of all, it's putting together a good work ethic. so that your creativity has support. And second of all, I mean, let's be honest, if you're going to create multi-volume universes and things like that, you definitely want to make sure you have the consistency that you need. You want to be able to go, oh yeah, this person is, a left-handed schizophrenic and they're going to be doing X, that sort of thing. I mean, I'm a novelist and a screenwriter, and I didn't know what I was doing when I wrote my first book, and being an old-style programmer from the 1970s, I went, and before I wrote the first word, I did a flow chart of what I thought the plot should be for my first novel, because I didn't know any better. But I will tell you this, having done so made it so much easier to structure the story because I had a beginning, I had a middle, I had an end. I had, all the different subplots that were going to make the story what I thought was successful. So having good habits is definitely a plus when you're doing writing. And to what you said before, one of the things that I've done is I have learned how to use my smartphone, which apparently is a lot smarter than I am. No, I'm serious, man. This thing can do more things than I can do. But one of the things that I did find on it was the part where you can dictate notes to it. Because when I'm out during the day, I'm like you. I may think of something that I think is, oh, man, that's brilliant. That would be good. That'll do this. That'll do that. And then by the time I get home, I go, what did I have for lunch today? So I think it sounds like you are well on your way to discovering the best possible way to not only create your art, but building the consistency and the quality that you want to have. It sounds like a very good process. How successful do you feel that you are at it now, having acquired those skills and used them as much as you have?
Well, successfully, I mean, I guess it comes down to the project actually getting out and getting, to the people and seeing, did this pay off? A lot of the things where now I'm using those processes are not even out.
Mm-hmm.
I have like a fantasy and a sci-fi story plus a comic, and those are the three things that I really nailed down, none of which are out yet.
Okay.
And, I mean, time will tell how well this is going to work out for me.
And how well they're received, or are you saying how well the tool set that you're putting together to feed your creativity actually works for you? Do you think one will be an indicator for the other, or are you just looking empirically at improving your process?
I believe that one may affect the other.
Uh-huh.
Previously, I kind of would just do things by ear. I would wing it, and, okay, this is my story. I know my story. I thought of it. I know it. So I would just go ahead and do it.
Right.
In these new stories, I specifically am not doing it that way. I'm working from my plan, and everything is written down. Is it going to seem rigid? Is it going to seem like, it's not very fluid? I don't know. Hopefully it won't appear too different from what I'm used to putting out.
But it also gives you a much better overview about the entire world that you're creating and effectively how other people might react to it, because then you can do a direct comparison to what you've done in the past, what was successful in the past.
Yeah.
I think that having a better overview, it's my feeling that it makes you a better artist, not in terms of drawing, but in terms of creating. If you know your world, if you know the structure of your world, the physics of your world, the characters that you're going to have, what their motivations are and things like that, and these are all things that I had no idea about before, and I'm telling you, I had like 3-week-long writer's block. I think that had I had better habits like you have, I would have been a much better structured writer. So I think these are all positive things that play in your favor.
Yeah, I found that it frees up a lot of my thinking power. I mean, when I slap down that piece of paper, I already know what I'm going to draw. Instead of slapping it down and then having to look at it and saying, okay, what am I going to do here? It's helped me a lot, but I hope I don't push something out and then people say, what happened? What happened to you, man?
Sure. Let me ask you, do you storyboard your stories even before you do, before you do the panels and do the art and things like that? Do you kind of sketch that out to see how it's going to work out? I mean, how in, to what extent, I guess is a better question. To what extent do you go ahead and pre-produce, the structure, the plot, the content, and maybe even some of the imagery before you actually sit down to seriously draw, ink, and produce?
Sure. Strangely enough, when I'm doing a drawing, normally I would just sit down and do it and start with a blue pencil and go from there.
Sure.
But when I'm working on a 3D comic, I'll sit down and I'll do some quick sketches, and I'm sure you're aware, like 3D, a lot of the problems people have is that the characters look stiff and,
right,
emotionless sometimes. So I'll try to draw it out a little bit and say, okay, can I get this lifelike pose? Can I get this dynamic pose?
Mm-hmm.
And try to do that. So I'll end up storyboarding the 3D a little bit to try to make it look more natural.
You start out sketching in 2 dimensions, and then go ahead and then transfer and render using a 3D environment.
Yeah, I might even scan in that drawing and use it as my backdrop in the 3D app and try to line up and pose my characters that way as best I can. And usually that works out for me.
Well, some people do have it. They find it difficult to compose in 3D because of the amount of work that it takes. But obviously, if you're facile doing it in pencil and then transferring, obviously your process works for you. Let's go here. What are some of the things that you see on the horizon? Let's say, barring somebody going and dropping a whole bucket full of money in your lap for your site, for your ideas, and for your current art, where do you think you're going to be maybe 5 years from now?
Honestly, what I'm going to try to do, what I'm looking at doing, is getting more into the writing of it.
Okay.
I want to get to a point where I'm selling the writing, doing my book cover, selling the writing, and then I want to do my comics. Have time to do my comics, but really make my bones on the writing.
Mm-hmm.
And I just think that once you get that written story, I can take that and springboard that into anything.
Sure.
And, here's a comic based on, remember this story? Here's a short little comic based on that animation here. Hey, maybe a live action. But I think it starts with that story.
Right. I mean, that's been said by many, many, many people. If you don't have a good story, you're wasting your time trying to put together a comic.
Right.
Let me. You mentioned DC Comics. You mentioned the Marvel Universe. Are there any comics today that you particularly like? The style, the stories, and is there anything out there that kind of inspires you? And I don't want to try to imply that you would do anything derivative of somebody else's stuff, but are there particular comics out there and characters out there that you think are particularly compelling that you follow yourself?
I really loved, it's a shame this got canceled, but there was the latest run of Black Panther, and he was in Hell's Kitchen. That I could not get enough of it. And the artist, I can't remember, I think his name was Francisco something Vallejas or something, but that was some great stuff. I tend to like a lot of the characters who are maybe a bit powered down.
Okay.
I don't know if you ever heard of a comic that is called The Boys. And
no,
it's by
I haven't, but I'm sure.
Oh yeah, I'm sure everyone knows this one, but it was really just off the rails. These guys were the boys were who you call when the superheroes get out of control. so you round up the boys, and it was just, I'm like, I can't believe it. And actually DC was publishing it at first, or maybe Wildstorm, I can't remember which imprint or whatever was publishing it, but they were like, we can't publish this.
Right.
And they backed away real quick.
Uh-huh. I actually have an idea that I'm going to just give away to everybody for free. You mentioned the boys are who you call when the superheroes get out of control. I want to suggest a group, not a vigilante group, but a group called the Moms. And those, you call the moms when the superheroes get out of control, and then the moms assert order with their bad acting children. All right, so I'm giving that idea away. It just came to me. Anybody who wants to use it, go ahead, take it. You don't have to give me any attribution, but I do want that 5% off the top, okay?
Hey, you all heard it here first.
But I mean, think of that. I mean, that sounds like a pretty cool concept to me, but you know, I took drugs in the 70s, so I can't always trust my own judgment. Okay, so you've got those people who kind of influence you and things like that. Would you? And I do like the statement about liking characters who are a little played down as far as, you know, maybe superpowers or capabilities and things like that, because of course it injects a little more of humanity and how humanity has to deal with daily problems, situations, other people, and things like that, which I think make for more compelling stories. I mean, you've got Superman who could do just about anything, including turn back time, and sometimes that makes it too easy to problem solve. So I can see how that would appeal to the writer in you. You mentioned the fact that you were looking at really doing something hard in the sci-fi genre. Can I assume that your environment, your characters, and things like that would be Black-oriented?
Yes, definitely.
And what's kind of like, what's just the general structure of that creative universe that you want to put together?
Well, I'll tell you, one of my problems that I do have sometimes is that writers sometimes take the easy way out, and they will. If they have a character that's supposed to be capable of a certain feat, when it comes time for them to get past a plot hurdle, all of a sudden the character can't do that feat anymore. And I thought, I'm going to make a group of people who are so powerful, I'm really going to have to really work every single page to challenge them in any way whatsoever. And that kind of started it for me. It's like, what could the situation be where these people can do all these things and yet they are in trouble?
Mm-hmm.
So, I mean, I kept thinking, I mean, just, and I was actually reading, physics websites and just trying to brush up on stuff. But that's the scary thing about sci-fi too, because you don't want to look like a complete idiot when you're doing sci-fi, because someone always comes along who knows more about physics or chemistry, and they're like, that could never happen.
And for those people who are a little bit more intelligent, they'll read that story, and a deficiency like that will pull them out of the story. All of a sudden, there's no more suspension of disbelief, because something is just so wild that you go, oh man, that could never happen. That would never do. He would never do that, or you can't get gold to turn into helium, or whatever. And so that's good, because that's the best science in science fiction. I mean, you look at some of the classical science fiction writers who were into that. You've got Arthur C. Clarke and all of the hard science fiction writers from the past, and the reason why I think they were so successful is because their work was grounded in that kind of scientific reality, where it was plausible. So that's pretty cool, and let's take the ultimate example. You've got Superman, and in order to bring him down to Earth, you got various kinds of kryptonite that affect his powers, and he has to think his way out of those difficulties. So I could see the challenge in you putting together a story where, no, we're not going to use a cheap plot point in order to move the story along. That it sounds like you're going to try to put together some reality-based, or at least sociologically and scientifically reality-based storylines. Is that what you're looking at?
Oh yeah, and really, it just comes down to, I just don't want to cheat. I don't want to cheat the reader. I want it to be, intelligent. And really, the best thing about sci-fi, and especially comics too, is that I learned a lot And even if it wasn't possible, I have people coming up to me, those things aren't real, right? That can never happen. And I would say, well, why can't it? And then I would go to the encyclopedia, or I would go ask somebody, and I would bug my parents about it, and they would be like, I don't know, go to the encyclopedia. And I would live in those things until I'd say, oh, I guess they were right. That can happen. But the point is, I learned something, and that's really what I would like to do. It should be fun, and yet you can also learn something. And there's no reason that there's so much wonder in physics and in science and in chemistry. You can make these things something that young black kids want to read or want to know about.
Sure, absolutely. And you figure too, yes, we'd all like to have, more general market appeal, but it sounds like you're gearing your work for the young black mind to feed its, whatever fertile farrow you have in their mind, and maybe help them explore that kind of creativity. I mean, that's all good stuff, man. I really appreciate that, John. I mean, a lot of people just look for commercial success, but to also want to help others, that's a pretty laudable thing to do.
Yeah, thanks. I'd like to pay that forward, because that's what happened with me. I read so much stuff that really stayed in my mind.
Yeah. All right. Let me take a break here. After this break, after this station ID, we're going to open up the phone lines and also the chat room for questions for you from the people who are listening. And, of course, as I said, the moment I say, does anybody have a question for you, there will be a huge sucking silence. So just prepare yourself for that, John. You're listening to Genesis Science Fiction Radio, a service of the Black Science Fiction Society.com website. And tonight is the May 3rd, 2013 episode, and our special guest, a really cool guy, is John Garrett. If you'd like to check out a little bit more about his work, go to hypertransitory, one word, no hyphens or anything, hypertransitory.com, and take a look at the brilliance of his mind, the things he's interested, and also the work that he produces. And as it is that time, does anybody out there have any questions that they would like to ask John?
Nope, don't have any questions at all. Who the hell is John Garrett anyway? Hey, John, this is Thaddeus. You know me as Evan Storm. You and I talk online all the time on Twitter. We just never met each other until now.
Yeah, of course. I saw you logged in there, man. How you doing?
I'm good. How you doing?
All right.
Good to hear you. Sounds like you're doing a lot. Staying busy, staying out of trouble.
Well, I don't know about that last one, but yes.
Well, staying out of trouble is boring, so I was hoping you were going to say, no, I'm not doing that. Staying busy is the part you want to be. Yes, I'm doing that part.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
So it's good to hear you. It's good to hear your voice. I mean, finally, I've been following your stuff for years now. It's a good thing. I'm glad to see you're doing well.
Thank you. And I'd like to say, too, that Even Storm is a writer. Most people who are probably listening to this probably already know that, but Thaddeus, he's a great writer himself, and I always read a lot of his stuff. So make sure to check him out. If you hit me up on Twitter or whatever, I'll send you his links.
I appreciate the shout out, sir. You guys have a good night. I'm just going to listen again.
Cool.
Someone in the chat room does have a question. They want to know, are your comics, the ones that you have online, are they easily viewable for mobile platforms like tablets or phones? Do you have a mobile app, or does the environment at I'm sorry, did you say you're at WordPress?
Yes, WordPress.
Yeah, does WordPress have a mobile app that helps people who want to check out your content in a mobile format?
Yeah, actually, WordPress has one that I'm using. It's a plugin, and what is that thing called? I can't really remember right now, but all it does is it literally just strips away most of the styles, and here's your content, and it puts it in there for you, so it makes it easier for mobile devices to get to the content without going through all the menus and everything. But I do not have a standalone app, which is a good question because that's one of the things I've always thought about doing. And, projects just get kind of pushed to the back. And it's like, yeah, I should do that. And I never really got around to it. But I think that's definitely, if you're a comic creator, you got to make it easy for people to get your stuff.
Right.
And that's the way it's going these days, is apps and such. So it really is something that I should do.
Well, and anybody who rides public transportation, when you look around, even though people may have their headphones in and they're listening to music or a podcast or something like that, they're still scrolling through things on their phones, checking out their mail, checking out, whatever, their social media, things like that. So obviously you want to remove any barriers that may, kind of put something between you and the readers,
Exactly.
That's another question. You mentioned that, some people were upset that you had kind of a darker universe that you expose them to. What kind of comments do you get? What kind of dialogue do you have with your fans who do patronize your site?
Well, on some of the superhero stuff, and there was people who were there for some of my blogging content, and then I kind of moved into the superhero stuff, and a lot of them were literally asking me, how long does it take you to do this? And they really don't know anything about comics, and they were only reading it because it was me. But then I started getting people who were saying, this is a great character, like my superhero was Kid Hype, and I get a lot of people who are like, when is that going to continue? And it's been a year, maybe a year and a half since I continued it. But they're like, oh, he was great. And when is more superhero stuff coming? Because then after the superhero stuff, I moved into maybe a fantasy comic.
Sure.
And then I moved into a sci-fi comic, and then more humor stuff.
Mm-hmm.
And people are just sometimes a little bit thrown for a loop, because between one series and the next, it can totally do a 180 on you. And, I was expecting another humor comic. But instead I got this brutal guy.
Somebody wants to know, when you're working in your 3D, what kind of tools are you using? What kind of software tools do you use for that?
Sure, I'm using DAZ Studio. It's free, Poser compatible. You probably know what Poser is.
Mm-hmm.
DAZ Studio is just Poser, but it's free. It doesn't have a lot of the higher end features. And you set up your models in there, and you can most of the models. You can get free models, and they make their money on you buy the props and the clothes and such. That's how they make their money. And I also use Blender, which is a free, very powerful modeling, posing. It does everything. You can do a trailer, you can do TV out of Blender, audio, all that stuff.
Mm-hmm. What do you find? Are you running into any kind of limitations in the tools out there that maybe hold you back a little bit from being as creative as you think you can be?
Oh yeah, definitely. It comes down to your hardware when you're working with 3D. If you, and the thing is, I'm working on a Mac.
Yeah.
And 3D and Macs, sometimes you just can't get the best out of it because there's not a huge selection of video cards.
Right.
Of graphics cards, and if you're on a PC, you can kind of tailor it more to what you need. And I found that I'm probably going to be in the market for a PC pretty soon, because sometimes you just, you don't want to even tackle that 3D product when the render is going to take the entire night.
Sure.
Or even longer. I've been out sometimes and I'm like, I wonder if that render is going to be done by the time I get home. And I get home, nope, 3 more hours to go. Okay. Well.
Would you just buy? I'm in the IT field. I have been since like 1970. But when I started writing, I actually built a computer that I thought would help me write better. And the biggest thing about it was, way back in 2001, it had dual screens. Would you go ahead and would you have something custom built for you? Do you buy off the shelf? What level of kind of hardware expertise do you think you're at right now, John?
Well, I don't think that I'd necessarily custom build it unless you just count. I mean, I'd probably just buy an off-the-shelf PC and just make sure I upgrade the graphics card.
Sure.
That's really all I need for that. Is just that those 3D. I mean, it really hits that. Well, what I use hits that graphics card pretty hard.
Well,
John, if you decide you want to design a PC that'll do more of what you want, you can give me a call and I can walk you through who can build you what you want, the way you want, to do what you want. Because sometimes off-the-shelf PCs are off-the-shelf, and they're not always the best they can be. So if you really need a custom-built 3D device that's going to do more, better, faster rendering so that you can actually have a life sometime, in the future, sometimes it's best to get a custom design, and there's 3 or 4 good companies out there I can recommend for you if you want to do that.
Oh, that's good because, I'm more in the Mac world. I don't really know much about the PC world. So
they're good.
That was going to be my thing is I'll just buy this one at Best Buy and put a graphics in it.
No. See, now you're going to have to send me an email. We're going to talk about how to get you the PC that you need versus the PC that's on the street. Because the PC on the street is not designed for specialty users. It's designed for the common user who knows nothing about PCs, and they want you to spend the most money and get the least bang for your buck. Now, I'll show you how to get the most bang for your buck, the same buck, and you'll find the PC you get from a custom-built facility will simply be so much better.
No, that is what I'm talking about, man. Thank you.
No, he is right. I mean, and that's the other thing. When you get an off-the-shelf PC, there's a whole lot of crap in there that you will never use, that you don't need, and it's so generic it's not going to feed your needs at all. So that's a very good idea, and I'm sure Thaddeus would put you on the right track, right now and in a hurry. So, keep that in mind that way. And then the other thing is you don't want to overspend. If you're not careful, you spend a whole lot of time, and a whole lot of money that doesn't suit you very well. If you do move into doing a lot more of the 3D rendering, do you think you're going to be doing animating to kind of augment the stories that you're doing?
Yes, definitely. Because when you're working in 3D, all the assets, they're right there.
Sure.
You can use that very same asset and spin her around and do whatever. And, I wouldn't say it's exactly easy, but it's right there for you to do. And at this point, I'm doing mostly still images, so then there's that uphill battle. I have to learn how to really animate it correctly. And as we were saying before, you're always going to be learning something. So, it's not necessarily a showstopper or anything, but it's just like, okay, I'm going to have to stop and figure out how to do this. And, it's one more thing.
Well, like I said, as a creative entity, doing the kinds of things that you're doing, what you do is always, you personally are a work in progress.
Oh, yeah.
Does anybody have any other questions for John?
I have a question along the similar lines. Hi, my name is Alonzo. I'm ADT Pro. I do 3D graphics. I did. Unfortunately, I don't know a lot about your site and the stuff, but I saw some great stuff there. I was just wondering, how do you feel? I'm always happy when I hear another black artist that is doing 3D, and especially since when I first started doing 3D, I came from a 2D background, and I got a lot of riff from a lot of black artists, as if I was betraying them. Same as how you were getting a lot of riff with your stories about how you wrote your stories. Do you ever get that? How do you feel as transitioning from a 2D, specifically a 2D black artist, into a 3D world that there's probably not a lot of black people doing it, and with a lot of the black people that are, it's just that stigma like that you might be abandoning, or is it even in the comic book genre? Sometimes they don't take 3D as seriously, or it may not be as lifelike or as good as 2D. How do you deal with that, or do you ever find yourself having to deal with that?
No, you're right. I know exactly what you're talking about, but I would not say I get it from black artists mostly. But when I am doing 3D, and at some point the barrier to entry on 3D is very low. I can go get that studio. Anyone can get that. They can get the same models I've got and crank out a picture. So other traditional artists assume that you're not doing any work.
Right.
And there's no artistry to it. But there really is. It doesn't matter if you have the same tools as me. You're a different artist than me, and we're going to have different results. Exactly. Is the way I see it. But there is a stigma. You're absolutely right. When it comes to 3D art, there's a stigma that you are not really an artist, especially, I've found, if you are using a posing app like Daz or Poser, and you're not even modeling it. People say, you didn't model that yourself? Well, no, I had the stock figure, and then I changed it, and I modified it.
Right.
And I used my own creativity to make this picture, but that's not good enough for them. So I just had to get over it. There's nothing, I can't convince these people. I'm not going to try to convince them, but I know exactly what you are talking about.
Right. To the point, I worked on a project for one of the, I can't play them down, founding members of Black SCIFI, and he gave me some beginning meshes, and he told me to get creative with it. And, if you look at the two, he gave me some beautiful work to start with. I was able to enhance and bring out what was already there, and it was two completely different models. So, a lot of people, I got a lot of, it's not real art, and it's not that kind of thing, and it's completely different. Even if you had the same, just as you said, getting your creative poses and story out of those poses, or even just texture mapping it, or even changing the names, like the noses, like with a poser model. And when you make the nose bigger, or the lips thicker, you have, or put black hair in it. And, it's a completely different genre of work as far as I'm concerned. So kudos to that, and I hope to check out more of your work and what you're doing with that, and that you overcome any obstacles very easily when it comes to that kind of thing.
Hey, thanks, man. I appreciate it.
Mm-hmm.
Hey, this is H. Wolfgang Porter, composite media producer and novelist and whatever else I can think of at the moment. Hey, I just want to ask you about your character that you said was far from the anti-hero, was a killer. I just want to know more about what your creative process. What drove you to make your character like that?
Well, thanks. And first of all, I just want to say I know your work, man. So I appreciate hearing from you. And great stuff. Great stuff. I just want to say that I came up with that because, I was doing lighter characters, lighter fare stuff. And I think I was watching, you watch these TV shows, and they turn out the same. The person is he's a bad guy, but really he's got a heart of gold. And I just thought, what if he didn't have a heart of gold? What if he really was the bad guy that he appears to be? And I said, I'm going to do that. And I did. It was popular, but again, like I said, I was a bit surprised at the reaction to it. But I can't remember what TV show it was, but you know what I'm talking about.
Yeah. Oh yeah.
Yeah, definitely. That's exactly where it came from. Well,
that's actually pretty refreshing. I'm not trying to denigrate. It's not particularly a 100% original idea because the character Hannibal Lecter, that's how he got over. The fact that he's reprehensible and he's unrepentant and he's never made any bones about that. Well, that was a bad pun. Sorry, I didn't mean to put that in there like that. But anyway, but the thing is, people like that. They like that's what they like about him. And And the thing is, you don't hate him, and which is really cool about him is most people don't hate Hannibal Lecter. They like him. It's like, they're kind of like those people that, when somebody has that mean dog but he only bites the people that are a pain in the ass, everybody likes that until they turn out to be the one that's a pain in the ass, and the dog bites them. But yeah, but still that's refreshing in the fact that, if it's not the murderer with a heart of gold, it's the hooker with a heart of gold or something like that, So
exactly.
So yeah, there's definitely a certain amount of value in just pure unrepentant, and to do so as to have your hero, not hero, but to have your villain as the protagonist and still not compromise their their evil. Oh, that was the other character I was thinking of. Even though he was fictional, but he wasn't, he wasn't fantasy. Well, I guess he could have been if you called it the Tony Montana, from Scarface. There was nothing redeemable about that dude from start to finish.
I just watched that a couple of weeks ago. Yeah.
In fact, if you look at his character arc, he actually got worse at the end. So technically, it's not really a new idea, but to see it in a comic and to hear someone have done it, successfully is interesting. But I also found it interesting, what you just said about how, what drove you to make that character that way.
Yeah, and I think that a lot of times people see the same things, and you're like, oh, I know where this is going. I know exactly where this is going, and I think you must know from writing. You're like, I'm not going to make that same mistake. And so that's exactly what I did. So I'm glad you found that to be refreshing, because that's how I meant it to be. So.
Well, that especially these days, it's you run into I hate to say it, but most of the really interesting original ideas pretty much got nailed down by the 70s. Because all the old not stereotypes, but standards. All those standards, kind of got kicked in the teeth back then, so that by the time the 80s rolled around, it's like, you had to come up with something new. You had to take what had come before and then turn it on its head in a different way. But and then after that, by the time the 90s came, then you really started having a lot more rehash, and it was getting harder and harder and harder to make original, concepts. So, by now it's like there's, everything, when they say everything's been done, yes, it has been done. So now it's just like, okay, so since you know that, how do you spin that?
Yeah, you got to spin it and flip it somehow.
Well, the easiest way to do that is to not use conventional plot tricks.
That's a difficult thing, though. You have to have, you really have to have. And we're talking beyond talent now. You have to have the experience and how would you say it, cunning to avoid those. Because let's face it, when most people get into writing, all they're really armed with is the stuff that they've seen before. How many people, actually take the time to go take, study literature, and all this, in a formal setting, and learn how, the actual, premises of how you actually do that from a technical aspect. Most people don't do that.
Well, that is true. You can't teach creativity in that vein. But let's take something simple. Let's take Alfred Hitchcock. Alfred Hitchcock was Psycho. First of all, everybody criticized him because he was doing a horror movie, and being such a well-known talent, they thought that was a waste or a cop-out or whatever. But he did one simple thing. He took the star of the movie and killed her off in the first 30 minutes of the movie. Something that had never been done before. Just something simple like that. It doesn't have to be highly complex, but it has to be sufficiently different enough that people go, wow, that's a new twist on an old story. And to what you said, Wolf, finding that measure of creativity is not an easy thing. That's what everybody's trying to do. Everybody's trying to put together their version of the great American novel, their version of one of the most unusual comic book characters that's been done so that you could bring people to the table, and they're saying this was brand new, this was something unexpected. And yes, you're absolutely right. The hardest part is figuring out how not to fall into those pitfalls. But I think that everybody here, everybody in chat, and everybody who's going to listen to this as a podcast is going to have to agree with me when I say there are some lazy-ass writers out there. And people, no, I'm serious. People think that just because they wrote it, and just because they finished it, and just because they posted it, that is they have hit on an accomplishment. And what's so disappointing is there's so much more to it than that. You know, just writing it doesn't guarantee that you're going to have a great story. And that's one of the things that I think that not only BSFS serves as a good proving ground, but there's enough talent here that if somebody puts up a story and says, okay, so what do you think? There's enough people with enough experience, there's enough people who've looked at enough scripts, there's enough people who have checked out comics, that there can be some good critical, some critique that would be of value to writers. So, you know, like you said, John, you know, at the very beginning of your process, you would sit there with a blank piece of paper and then you would start to write the story. Now you have come to the point, you evolved to the point where you know that you have to put in, you know, you have to do your due diligence in a better manner than that. And hopefully we have an environment here and we have a community that can foster people's creativity in ways that they probably would not have accepted. The hard hump that we all have to get over is trying to avoid, you know, always, you know, getting hurt feelings when someone critiques you, and being able to listen to people who might have something to offer.
You know,
it can be tough. It can be tough.
What were you going to say? Go ahead. No,
I'm sorry, go ahead.
Oh, I'm waiting on you guys.
No, I was just saying, go ahead. You were coming up with something.
Well, I mean, that's the essence of it. I mean, you know, look at what John's doing. He and Jarvis are laying out Genesis 2 magazine, and you know, here again we have the creative juices of the BSFS family, and you know, I'm sure that of all the submissions that were sent, not every single one, you know, got into the magazine and things like that. And instead of looking at that as some sort of failure, you know, we should be encouraging more and more people to write better and better and better, so that we grow our community.
Yeah, so that's what I was basically going to say. I was one thing I learned from suffering through some brutal critiques is, you know, other than, you know, giving me a much thicker skin, also seriously makes me, like, you know, when your puppy craps on the floor, what do? You stick its nose in, and then you start weighing it out with the rolled up newspaper, right? So yeah, I mean, that's basically what happened to me, you know, with doing those critiques, especially in a professional environment. You know, I mean, I was literally torn to pieces, you know, when I came in with something that, you know, that had flaws. I mean, you know, unfortunately, I was even at that level, I wasn't shooting crap, but there was obviously flaws and technical technical mistakes that I was making, so that it wasn't so much that, you know, what I was doing looked bad or sounded bad or anything, but it's like, you know, okay, but the context and the content that I was, you know, and the way I was getting the content there was issues with that. So, you know, and I, like I said, I totally got taken down, like almost to the ground, you know, on occasion. So in that respect, I think we all need that at times, you know. I mean, and you know, and generally, you know, and even from people that, you know, we don't necessarily respect their opinion, you know, because there's always that one person or 15 sometimes, especially get online. You know, there's always those folks that, you know, just, you know, they come up with that just sucks, you know, but don't have any real input on.
Yeah, there's no critique. It's just, it sucks.
But on the other hand, you kind of need them as well as the people who are saying, well, I didn't like it because, and then they tell you why. You know, and then, you know, balanced against the people who say, well, I liked it because. the people you really want to watch out for are the people that you say, because you didn't reach them in any way whatsoever. So, to me, that's faith. People hate it. Then I know I still did my job because they watched it and they had an emotional reaction to what was going on. And more often than not, you have to know the difference between when people hate it because now if they hate it because of your technical ability, then that's you. That's something you have to improve. If they hate it because they didn't like the way the story went, then you examine that, and did they not like it because the story, because there were elements of the story that that fell into like I was saying, fell into a technical thing. Like things I hate in stories is those by the way moments. One thing about it, even though there's that rule that says you learn the rules so you learn how to break them. I'm all about that, but the thing is, you still got to learn the rules, and up to a point, you got to follow them. Before even in the process of breaking them, just before you break them, you have to follow them up to that point. So, when you have those by the way moments, when like William was saying about how those things like in those Superman stories where he's got all these abilities, and yet suddenly he can't do this one thing. It's like, well, where the hell did that come from?
Yeah.
I mean,
yeah.
You didn't lead up to that. You didn't lead up to that in the story. And of course, just as William was saying, and yourself, where people can predict how things are going, you want to give them that a little bit, just so if nothing more than so when you hit them with the what about this, if they weren't paying attention, to everything to the other threads that you were leading up with. And then when you throw that on them, then they say, wait a minute, where did that come from? And they go back and they pay attention and say, oh man, it was here all the time. I just wasn't paying attention. Now that's where you want to be. But if it's just, well, where the heck did this come from? And there's no reference to it, and it just and it's just there.
Well,
so
that is poor writing, and the other thing is you don't want to treat your readers like a fool. Hang on, guys. You're listening to Genesis Science Fiction Radio, a service of the BlackScienceFictionSociety.com website. This is the May 3rd edition, 2013, and we've been talking to John Garrett and a host of the usual suspects. I have a question too. When people critique you, John, online. How do you treat that in your own mind? I mean, do you look at their validity, or if you think you're pretty strong in what you've written, do you tend to discount what they've said? How important, what kind of importance do you put on that kind of ongoing critique?
I think it's very important, and as a matter of fact, I do look out kind of what we were saying. If it's technical, if someone is commenting and saying, I don't understand what happened there, that means I failed. But if they understood it and just didn't like it, well, that's another thing.
Sure.
And I do watch out for that. I don't want to see comments where people say, why did this happen? What's going on? Then it's my storytelling has failed.
Yeah, when they got lost in it and couldn't follow it.
Yeah, and like I said, I've had some people, most of the criticism I get is when I switch genres on them. If I switch into a humor and they'll say, oh, what happened to that fantasy? We're going to see more of that. And I see this is a 3-parter. Well, I guess I'll be back in 3 weeks. Maybe there's something else coming up. And mostly the criticism that I get is more on arts forums where I'm trying to better my craft. I mean, the people on these, like the Blender forums or even on Dad Studio forums or CG Society or conceptart.org, these places, they're not brutal, but they're not there to coddle you either. You post something and you say, can I make this better? And they're going to let you know what's wrong.
Right.
So you better be ready for it. But it's necessary.
That's a good thing.
Yeah, definitely. But, some days you're like, I did a great piece here. Let me just post this up. And then they'll tell you what's wrong with it. And it's like, oh, man, thought I had something there.
Well, but on the other tip, though, you also have to remember, too, you're in competition with a lot of these people. So, it's not, a lot of times critique is critique, and you have, what that old saying about taking it with a grain of salt. Well, online, you better take it with a fistful of salt. You just have to make sure you keep your hypertension down because, there's just, you're in competition with these people, and even though it may not be for money, hopefully it is, but even if it's not, it's for, it's for rep, if nothing else. It's online, most people, it's all about rep. So, if you're turning out stuff that's consistently good and improving, there are people that are going to hate, not because they don't think your work is good for real. Because they're like, dang, this dude's just, why is this dude ahead of me,
Right. Well, we did invent, black folks did invent the term haters. And I'm just pointing out the obvious, and there, yes, it would be great if everybody was supportive, but, we've got a bad economy. We've got people worried about where their next check is going to come from. And there are going to be times when people criticize you, let's say, less than objectively and less than fairly, merely because they do, as Will said, they do perceive you as competition. Excuse me. And so, all of that's the tough part of wading through critique, which is trying to figure out what has merit, what doesn't have merit. Am I really looking at something I have to worry about, or is this somebody who just has an issue that they want to, take up with me for whatever reason?
You know what I think, William? I think that
when
when you're looking at people critiquing your work, look at the work. Look at their work. Exactly. If you're going to critique my work, look at their work. Look at what they're producing. If I read your work and go, damn, that's good, I might listen to you because I like your work. But if I read your work and go, it's not bad, but I'm not loving it. Well, maybe he's right, but maybe I'm going to go with my own gut on what I'm writing because I like what I'm writing and I feel what I'm writing, and I'm going to run with that, even if this particular critic doesn't like it.
I actually ran, and that makes a whole lot of sense.
Work to admire. Yeah. If you admire their work, then say, yes, this brother, I like what he's doing. His work is tight. I'm going to listen to him because what he's doing is working for me.
Yeah, that is true. I ran into a situation like that with someone who put a bad review up on one of my novels. And then, I thought about it, and, at first I was like a little PO'd about the whole thing. And then I went and read the rest of his reviews, and I went, oh, he's just an ass. I don't have to listen to him. And that immediately made my whole day better. The sun was brighter, I was back in love with life again.
The birds were singing, the buds were budding, all was right with the world.
Exactly. That's so, you do have to consider the source.
Well, another thing, too, is actually read those bad reviews. I got a bad review on one of my novels, and, of course, when you write your work, you think it's the best thing since sliced bread, and it may be up to a point, or it actually may be the best thing since sliced bread. So, you never know. But the thing is, even good reviews and bad reviews, but particularly bad reviews, you gotta really read them, and not so much interpret them, but just not so much listen to what they're saying, but see what they're saying. Because one guy, he was saying that he was saying my book was hopelessly average, and there was some other stuff he said. Yet, he said it was a page turner. Now, last time I checked, any book that I've ever read that was just, I've never finished it. Let alone couldn't stop turning the pages, right?
And hopelessly average does not mean I continue. Hopelessly average means I've got some dishes that need washing. Let me get in there and wash dishes.
Exactly. There are books that were average that I started reading years ago and I've never finished it. In fact, I don't even know what I did with them. But still, but the thing is, so when I read that, I was like, well, that was a paradox. So. As I continued to read it, and then I read it again, I realized what had happened. Because I wrote something that he didn't expect. Okay, he was expecting what he knew and what he felt he had expertise in or whatever. And then I threw, even though I wrote in that particular genre, I threw him a curve. So instead of just saying, wow, I read this and he threw me for a curve, he went this other way. Because how dare I, do something to surprise him or some stupid crap like that. I mean, that's
John mentioned that, when he did a story that was a little darker than what he'd done before, there were a lot of people who were upset about it and who actually contacted him. I mean, at least they did him the respect of letting him know, which is not bad. It's kind of like, okay, yes, it's not criticism out in public, but at least they did him the solid of letting him know that this was not what we expected out of you, and we weren't exactly happy about it.
In that vein, though, I don't think that's I don't think that's a bad thing. Because the one thing that says is that those people read that story, and the content. Again, it wasn't your technical. It wasn't your lack of technical skills or mistakes or stuff like that threw them. It was the fact that the content got them. So they still took the time to and were honest enough and forthright enough to let him know. And those are the kind of people you do want to listen to, because they offer a perspective that obviously in your own head you don't get.
Right, and because of this call, I do think of that differently now, but before this, that was kind of a dark, moment for me, where people were sending me these negative emails, and I thought, wow, I really failed that time. But hearing some of your thoughts on that tonight, it makes me think I surprised people, but didn't really fail necessarily.
No.
Well, you know what? Their expectation was what was adjusted, and that's one of the reasons I tell people I write a lot of stuff. I write a lot of different stuff. You'll see something light and funny today, and you'll see something dark and terrible tomorrow, and you'll go, did he write this? Yes, I wrote that. And I write a lot of stuff, a wide array of stuff. So no one comes to me and says, man, I love all your light and fluffy stuff, but I didn't know you could write this other stuff. My God, serial killers eating the organs of the people they find? Where did you get that from? Oh, well, I just decided I wanted to write something different today. And I really think we need to stop letting people define our work. They want to pigeonhole our work and say, this is all you can do. You can't do anything else. I plan to write something different every day. I did so for the last month. Every month, every April, I write 30 days of new crazy stuff every day.
But, that's advice that I was given. I was given advice coming up like, you want to be known as the guy who does this. So you're going to do this one thing.
They tell us.
Yeah, and that's what they tell you, and I couldn't really do that.
So don't do that. Right?
So
what moves you?
Where that all comes from is the old brick and mortar style of for marketing. Because I ran into the same thing. Where I would write. I wrote a story. It's funny. I'll write a story that I think is mainstream, but I'll still write it my way. Okay, so it's like. The person I'm submitting it to, for potential publication, will look at it, and I know they like the story because they always say that. Man, I really like this, but this is always the same thing. Well, I don't know how to market this. So I'm like, so what I'm hearing is not so much that I'm failing in my writing craft, is that I'm hearing that what I'm writing, these people don't have the imagination or the courage to market yet, because they figure. Just based on what they're used to selling, they don't see how they can sell that.
Yeah, it doesn't fit right in their machine, so it's too much effort.
That means for me is that okay, that I have to find somebody that can sell it or sell it my damn self. So
pretty much that's are now. If you write something that someone says I've never seen this before, that doesn't mean you go, well, I guess I won't write that anymore, because if it works for you, you should keep writing it.
That's stupid. But
I'm pretty sure when Stephen King wrote Christine, I'm pretty sure that was a vast departure from his standard work. But and I believe it sat around for a few years before he could sell it, but eventually he did.
Mm-hmm.
So there's no reason that you might write something that people just go, wow, that's so strange. I'm not sure what to do with that. But for them, that's their loss, because so often, I mean, let's look at J.K. Rowling. 17 people said, no, baby, we're not interested in what you're selling. Thanks, keep on rolling. Well, now those same 17 companies are rolling around in their razor blade-filled swimming pools, screaming and pulling out their hair as she rakes over $1 billion in sales. Really?
Well, I mean, that'll happen. I mean, also look at, a piece of crap writing like 50 Shades of Grey.
There you go, another one.
You guys can't tell me that is good writing. That's laudable writing. And yet, the public is fickle, and the public also wants to jump on the bandwagon,
Yeah,
well,
you can't escape it now.
It's not that I'm hating on that. I mean, because you're right, it's crap. But the thing is, like that and several other stories that fortunately my mind is completely blocking out, so that I'm glad for that. But the thing is,
Twilight. Yeah, I brought it back. Twilight.
Damn it. I completely had it blocked out. Now I got to recalibrate my mental shield. Okay, so, but the thing is, is those things tap into an audience. I mean, it's just probably not the audience you were looking for. But the thing is, it's tapped into an audience, and the thing is, let's face it, the mainstream loves the insipid. Now if you can deal with that, I mean, because let's face it, the person who wrote Twilight and all other horse hockey, granted, yeah, they're probably never going to win any Pulitzer prizes or Nebula awards or anything like that. But by God, they're rolling around in their gold-filled swimming pool, laughing all the way to the bank. So, but on the other tip, and then of course now they got a deal. They're writing. I think she's writing something for some TV show that, from what I understand, is just as god awful. But the thing is, it was a vehicle to get her to something else.
But that's what we're saying. Don't let anybody convince you that what you've written isn't good, because 50 Shades of Grey isn't good. Didn't stop her from selling 1 million copies.
Right.
Stephanie Meyerson hasn't written a thing that's good ever. Hasn't stopped her from selling 1 million copies of anything. The host, Twilight 2, 3, 4, all of them were terrible, but she kept on selling them and someone kept buying them. So keep writing what works for you. Do a good job. I'm always big on that. Do a good job. Be a good writer. Know the craft. Know how to write. Tell a good story. But tell your story.
Well, I don't think we have to worry about that. Oh, something that just occurred to me, John. Have you ever done any collaborative works?
Strangely enough, the only collaborative works I did and got paid for never came out.
Wow.
It was a couple years back, and it was supposed to be a graphic novel. I did a bunch of work, which I got paid for, but the creators, it was two siblings, two brothers, and they began to clash and over the story, and it never got done. I got paid, and they were like, "This is on hold." Never heard from them again.
How was the experience though of actually having to work with somebody else? Was it something that you found easy to do, or is it something that you think you're going to avoid in the future?
Yeah, I definitely wouldn't avoid it. I mean, that was a pretty painful project, but I certainly wouldn't avoid it in the future.
And you think as an artist you can get along well with others in a creative environment?
Oh, certainly. It's just I like to hear other people's ideas anyway, and then to realize their idea is really cool. Frankly, it's especially if it's something I never thought of. So that's even better.
Right. And then bouncing ideas off of somebody else also gives you kind of a sounding board that you don't normally have sitting in your lonely writer's garret all by yourself.
Yeah.
Something that has led me, that you guys have actually hit me to, is something I never got to experience myself, which, when you talk about, yes, when you write, you have to have a strong enough ego that you believe that what you've done is great. And if I were to be entirely honest with somebody, which I hate doing because I really don't want to tell anybody anything about me and don't really care about you guys, but I didn't know that I had written a good story until other people told me, until I saw reviews and things like that. So, there's a double-edged sword. I think about what you went through, John, when you got the criticism on your website about, having gone outside your boundaries. And, I can now understand, why I understand better, from having talked to people over the last 2 years, how to better manage that process. As Thaddeus said, you have to write for yourself, and you have to be invested in your writing sufficiently enough that you're going to keep going no matter what. You're going to stick strong to your own principles and to your own ideas, and that's when you're trying to put together commercial art of whatever nature, story, comic book, movie, short, what have you. There is that part, unless you're trying to write a 50 Shades of Grey or something, where you don't want to slut out and just write what you think you're going to get some money for. I mean, obviously there's that class of person. Hollywood is full of people who write on spec. But when you talk about creating art and trying to create a sustainable universe for your creatures, for your creations, it takes discipline, mental discipline, and emotional discipline to stay your own course. And I think that's one of the valuable things that I've learned from a lot of the people I've met at BSFS.
Well, one thing too, you have to be able to separate when you're working, when you're making work for someone, and when you're making work for yourself. I mean, like when you hear people talk about this slutting out, a lot of times they're working, they're working on contract. They're on work for hire. So when it comes down to that, there probably will be a point, when you're writing something for somebody, especially if you're doing a script or something or a comic book or something, and you're writing, and it's not your particular, you don't own the rights to it. There's going to be a point where you're going to have to either, get down on your knees or take the high road and walk, away from the money, So it's like, because it's not your project. I mean, you're working on it, and hopefully you're working in an environment and with people that you'll be proud to put your name on it. But you see it all the time, especially in the movie business, where a writer will have worked on wrote a script and the movie comes out so bad they say, look, I don't care what it says in the contract, don't put my fucking name on there. Excuse me. And I mean that's like
League of Extraordinary Gentlemen. I mean, did I say that out loud?
Wait, I'm still looking for the dump button for the F word. Hold on. No.
Alan Moore. Please don't put my name on League of Extraordinary Gentlemen because I'm so embarrassed of what you've done with it. So yes, that does happen.
Yeah, and I actually went to a movie networking meeting here in Chicago, and believe it or not, Tim Kazurinsky was there. That was supposed to be the big draw, and I never saw so many mutants in my whole life. And there were people there who, I understand that that's harsh, and I apologize for that. But here's how people don't know. This is how much they don't know. There was one guy there who was convinced that if he sold a script to a studio, that he could demand in his contract that he be on set all the time to watch how they managed his script, and to that's one of the things that one of the disappointing and sometimes hard lessons that you have to tell people is that if you sell an option to your story, whether it be book, comic book, or whatever, once you've sold that option, you don't own it anymore. In no way, shape, or form, and they can do with it as they will, which is to Thaddeus's point, talking about the League of Extraordinary Gentlemen, people will say this so doesn't reflect my art, and this is such a travesty of form and function that I don't want my name to be associated with this because it is so horrible. But on the other hand, once you've sold it, they get to do whatever they want with it. So, if you're lucky enough, John, to get somebody to come and purchase your website, your characters, your entire creative universe to date, once you do that, of course, you just have to turn your back and walk away because it is no longer yours. And sometimes that's hard when people have so much invested in their creative universes. It's hard to let it go.
Well, it's even painful when you see people in the comics and they worked on comics for, you look at Chris Claremont, he worked on X-Men for 20 years, was forced out, and still had an emotional attachment to these characters, and he has to sit back and watch, which he never owned. I mean, he didn't have any right to, expect any say over the characters, but even if someone bought all my characters, I really don't know. I don't know. I have plans for those characters, so it has to be a whole lot of money. But then to sit back and watch what someone else did would be kind of painful. Yeah.
Which kind of begs the question. I mean, how much more rubber hitting the road do you think you have for your universe? I mean, obviously you can write stories forever about your favorite characters. But have you thought about the creative arc that you're going to follow with your characters? And seriously, if you do retain the rights to what you have, nobody comes along and buys it, do you think you have enough juice in you to keep these stories fresh, keep them coming, and keep people interested? Or do you think you're going to lose interest?
I think that I have so many stories that I really could keep going on these things. And the only thing that I feel bad about is I do have a kind of fragmented audience where some of them just don't like sci-fi stuff. They want to see the fantasy thing, or they want to see a superhero, and that's the only thing that I take into consideration there. Where, okay, the next thing I do, I haven't done sci-fi in a while. I better come back with some sci-fi.
Mm-hmm.
But the rest of it, I have stories that I could just keep going, which I intend to. And I do have a plan, a roadmap for these characters to eventually move most of them into print, and really make a universe out of it, a publishing imprint or something of that such.
Sure. You can always license that stuff too. You could always get other people to work for you. Therefore, they would never make anything you didn't like. And they could bring creative juice and interest and ideas that you might not have considered. And you still get the last say over, oh, no, that guy can't do that. I don't want him to. That's why.
You know what? That's what I'm talking about.
Well, no, absolutely. I mean, look at Robert Ludlum. I think he's still writing, and he's been dead how long?
Oh, yeah.
That's
yeah,
like,
they keep coming out.
That's like Wally Cox in that Center Square and on Hollywood Squares. He'd been dead for like 4 years and was still appearing on the show because they banked that many shows. So, I mean, it is true. I mean, you can actually manage your universe better today than at any other time in our modern times. As far as publishing, as far as printing and things like that. And we're fortunate enough that at this point, the technology for self-publishing, for print on demand, gives those who would never get an opportunity to display their wares to actually get something done. So the cool thing is you mentioned when we started out that you didn't think that your numbers for web visits per month were not significant. But when you stop and think about the fact that you've got 10,000 and more people per month checking out what you have to bring to the table, that's a pretty powerful number. That's a very powerful number. And I don't want you to minimize that at all in terms of how you self-evaluate.
As a matter of fact, that number is beginning to approach the threshold to where if you could get it to double, that it'll probably continue to do so year by year as long as you continue to produce new material for it to be followed by. So It might behoove you to maybe ally up, get some writers, get some people to work with you, get some people to help you produce material. You have to remember, think about things like Mashable and Ars Technica and places like that. Even the Huffington Post for a long time was just one person writing it. Then they got 2 people. Then they got 4 people. Then suddenly they went from being something that, people might show up to look at every now and then to a place where people found their news on a regular basis, and they're now Arianna Huffington, for whatever her value one way or the other, I think she's a pretty smart woman, is now a force to be reckoned with. So there's nothing to say that you couldn't do the same thing with Hypertransitory. You go out, you find some people who are writing stuff that you like, get them to work with you, get them to work on something that either they believe in or you believe in, and you guys work together and produce something that draws the eyes. The number of viewers is the secret.
Yeah, and the other thing, you mentioned that a lot of people don't necessarily look to you for, science fiction or something like that. I think if you delineate your site where people can go directly to what it is they like, perhaps you might have a little more acceptance for things that are outside your wheelhouse. I'm looking at the time, guys. I hate to do this, but we're in the last minute of the show. I want to thank every single person who contributes to this show, the people who log on, the people who dial in and stop by. And I also want to thank the people who listen to this after the show as a podcast. Everybody who supports this site is very important. And a reminder to try to get your friends to log on, get your friends to take a look at what the SFS has to offer, and to thank the fabulous pool of talent that we always have contributing to both the site, who chat with people who are supportive, and really make this a great environment to belong to. And John, I want to thank you. For those of you who may have missed it earlier, we've been talking to John Garrett. His website, where you want to pick up a little bit more information about him, is Hypertransitory, all one word, hypertransitory.com, and you can find out a little bit more about him. And as we draw into we're a minute over, I want to thank everybody who helped out tonight, as always. And Professor, what do you have for your last words for everything?
You're funny. I think you pretty much summed it up. I just want to continue to thank everyone for supporting the site and keep supporting us, and we'll continue to keep doing our best to support you by, featuring you on the site, telling other people about you, bringing you on the site on the radio show. So once again, thank everyone for participating, and have a good night.
Yeah, and for those of you who don't know, as soon as we stop the recording, we still have an after party online for a little while. So those who may not have had a specific question but would like to dial in, you'll have a few more minutes to maybe talk to our guest, or just shoot the whatever that's called with the people who hang out. So thank you, everybody. This has been Genesis Science Fiction Radio Show for May 3rd, and it is a service of the BlackScienceFictionSociety.com. Thank you all for joining us, and we'll see you next week.